pastor in my recent classes, which is to go over the week in religious news. Didn't mean to alarm you, calm down. But instead of going over the what happened in religious news this week, I thought we could just talk just to make sure you guys know the religious backgrounds of everybody who's running for office. So do you guys know Hillary Clinton? What is her religious denomination? Methodist. She's Methodist, that's right. And in fact, Martin Marty, when he was here, said Martin Marty, who's a religious scholar at the University of Chicago, said he sat next to her at a table and she tried to impress him by quoting sections from the book of James, not realizing that James isn't one of the favorite books of Lutherans. But he was impressed that she had passages memorized. And then Donald Trump, what church did he grow up in?
Presbyterian.
He grew up Presbyterian, but for 50 years he went to, do you know what church he went to? It's called Marble Collegiate Church, which is, who was the preacher there? Norman Vincent Peale. And he met Ms. Maples at that church as well. And he still occasionally goes. He says he's Presbyterian. So the vice presidential candidates, Tim Kaine, that one's easier. Does anyone know what he is?
Catholic.
He's Catholic, and you know, there was a very good, well, I asked the other one, and then Mike Pence, what is he?
He's
Mike Pence, good Irish boy.
Well, he's
He grew up Catholic.
a fundamentalist.
He now goes to a mega church in Indianapolis, which is affiliated with the Evangelical Free denomination, which, does anyone know what Evangelical Free is?
I grew up in it.
Did you? Okay, sorry to hear that. So Evangelical Free is affiliated, it's out of Scandinavian.
What?
Go ahead.
Well, like the Mission Covenant Church, they both came out of Sweden. There were some Norwegians that came over in the immigration 1820s and 30s.
Okay.
And
So we're doing a
Free
deep
Church
dive. I hope we're not
wanted
going
to
to
be
go.
free of any denomination.
Okay. And the seminary is where?
Trinity in Chicago.
Yeah, just outside Chicago. So, and if anyone made it to the very end of the vice presidential debate, did anybody do that? Did. There was actually an interesting exchange toward the end of it, in which they got to the issue. The question was, do either of you candidates have an issue where you were required to do something in public office that ran counter to your personally held beliefs? Which was not a bad question. And Kaine answered first and said this was easy. I'm opposed personally to the death penalty, but when I was governor of Virginia, I had to issue orders doing that. That was my job, and so, you know, I have a separation between what I believe personally, but there's a public policy, which is the law, so I followed the law and did that. And then it went to Pence, and Pence said, he didn't answer the question. Instead, he attacked Hillary Clinton and said, I don't know how someone can be a Christian and support partial birth abortion. And then there actually broke out a very interesting and there wasn't a great deal of conflict where they both Pence and Kaine stated their beliefs on abortion and how Kaine believes personally that he's opposed to abortion but supports Roe v. Wade as the law of the land. And Pence said that he believed that his personal beliefs should be the views of the country, and he didn't see any conflict between those two. So it was an interesting debate, and actually I thought it was the best articulation of two positions on an important issue by two very religious people on a public stage like that. But the only unfortunate thing was it came 85 minutes into a very tedious debate. So that's, I'm not going to go through the religious news this week, but next week maybe we can talk a little bit more about how religion plays into each of the four candidates. But you guys were good, you got 3 of 4. So we're going to be talking about the changing nature of American religion, the face of American religion. And there are a couple of things most of you will probably know, but I want to make sure that we understand before I get too far into it. And one is, I'm going to make a distinction between 2 types of Protestants, mainline and evangelical. Does everybody understand the difference between that? We are which one? We're mainline, right? Even though we have evangelical to confuse everybody in the name. And sometimes I'll say conservative for evangelical, and I'll say liberal, even though most people in the conservative churches are conservative, but as you guys know, mainline churches have a mix of people who are conservative and liberal. So, but we're going to talk about what's growing, what's not growing, that sort of stuff. And we're going to start with this guy that you've never heard of, Dean Kelly, in 1972. In 1972, he's a very liberal theologian and lawyer, and he wrote a book called Why Conservative Churches Are Growing. And the thing is, conservative churches were growing at that time and have been growing for a good 20 years. Liberal churches were not growing at that time. And so he had a thesis that he's pushed that has dominated scholarly thinking for the last 30 years. And that was the reason that conservative churches were growing is because they had a firm and steadfast theology, and they stood opposed to the larger culture, and they required people to come to church regularly, and he talked about it as a stout theology. And the mainline churches were not growing because we were wishy-washy, and you couldn't really tell much difference between what was going on culturally, between what was going on in the church, the mainline churches, and the larger culture. And most people bought into it. It seemed to make some sense that that was true. And Albert Mohler, who's the head of the Southern Baptist, the Southern Seminary, which is the head of the Southern Baptist Convention, uses this repeatedly. A lot of people use this to beat up on mainline churches. He said the mainline denominations, this is 2005, have been losing members by the thousands for decades. Many of these churches have become so theologically inclusive, politically liberal, and doctrinally confused, like how all those three things are together, that there is no compelling reason for anyone to join. Sadly, they reject the one way out of their crisis. And what's the one way out of their crisis? A return to biblical authority, gospel preaching, and theological orthodoxy. And it's also interesting that there's a belief that success equals, that if you're growing and you're succeeding, that means you're right, okay? And if you're not growing, then you're wrong. What'd you say?
You could say that about Islam.
You can say it about a lot of things. And we'll talk about groups that are growing in America right now. And it's not these groups. In fact, it's a weird thing that he said this. The Southern Baptist Convention, you can see since 1950, this is their membership numbers. Wow. So they held steady for a long time, but they're dropping. And this for the 9th year in a row, they've lost members now. So the whole concept that if you have a stout theology, which I think they mean a fundamentalist or evangelical theology, it means that you'll grow, it sort of has been undercut in recent years. So not that we should be jumping up and down and having some schadenfreude that they're having problems, because we still are losing numbers too. So that's true for both of us. And so this is Tom Krattenmaker, religious scholar. It's time to bury the myth that liberal theology is causing the decline of mainline churches in America, and with it the twin falsehood that because of their conservative creed, evangelicals will own Christianity's future. So, so what is actually going on? Go ahead.
Where do the Catholics fit in all this?
You're like jumping way ahead. Get your own class. So that's one thing that's dramatically changed in recent years. Our understanding of what's going on, and this idea that if the more conservative you are, the more you'll grow. That's just not true, and that's just not happening. I'm going to focus on 3 major things that have been changing in religion, dramatic major things that have happened within religion, not just within our lifetimes, but within the last 10 years, okay? And these things are going along, and many of these things, you don't know the numbers, but most of us sort of feel it. And when people start talking about, I want to go back to the old days and stuff, we're reacting against some of these demographic changes. We're uncomfortable with it. We'd like to go back to what it was like before all these things started happening, before these things started changing. And you can see it in political circles when people start talking about embracing change Obama's message, hope and change, that we sense this change, and then those people who are saying, who are resisting change. And these demographic changes, I'm not saying they're good or bad, I'm just letting you know this is what's going on, okay? So some things that haven't changed, and that is one, America is still a Christian, it is a very religious country. One, we're still a very religious country, among the most religious in the world. Two, we're still a very heavily Christian country. And three, we're still very much Protestant, okay? So those things are true for right now. We are Christian, so when you see books that are announcing major and dramatic changes, remember those things, that we still are Christian, I mean, we're still religious, we're still Christian, and we're still pretty much Protestant. But here are the three things that are changing. The number of people who say they are Christian is declining. In most of your lifetimes, back in, I'm guessing most of you are around in the 70s, about 90% of Americans said that they were Christian. In 2007, 78% of Americans said that they were Christian. Just between 2007 and today, that number's dropped down to about 70%, okay? And it's happening not just to Protestants, not just happening to mainline Christians, it's not just happening to evangelical Christians, it's also happening to Catholics. And we'll talk, for Connor's sake, about Catholics in a little more detail in a second. The second thing, and we're going to talk about this in great detail next week, diversification. America's religious scene is becoming more diverse, so the point is that we're the most religiously diverse country in the world right now. So those are two important things. And then the last one, to help you with your D's. There's been a dramatic increase in the number of people dropping out of religious institutions overall. And most of you probably saw in the bulletin, this is happening mainly with millennials. Instead of speaking for millennials, I'm going to have my two daughters talk in just a little bit and address some of these questions about what they believe, what their friends believe, that sort of stuff. And feel free to ask some questions. So the things that are changing, the decline in the number of people at church, and this is a chart. It's a little hard to read, but the main thing is I told you right here. Just 2000. This is 2007. This is 2014. There are like 6 different groups that are doing religious surveys and studies. This is just one, but all of them are consistent on these 3 points. This is 2007. The number of people who said they're Christian, 78.4%. Last year, 70.6%. The number of people who said that they were Catholic, 23.9, dropped to 20.8. And what's going on there? About 35% of people who grow up Catholic in America right now drop out, okay? How do they keep the numbers fairly steady though?
Immigrants.
What's that?
Immigrants.
Immigrants. The number of Hispanics coming in are heavily Catholics, but the number of immigrants has been slowing down and not keeping up with the number of people dropping out. So again, no Schadenfreude, because the number of Lutherans who stay Lutheran, who grow up Lutheran and stay Lutheran, what would you guess? What percent?
Half.
About 55%. About 45% of Lutherans drop out. But we can be happy that the Methodists, they lose about almost 60% of their people. And the Congregationalists, they lose 70% of their people. The worst, Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses. No wonder they go door to door trying to convert people. So the other important thing to notice here, the number of Protestants, 51.3% down to 46.5%. And this is important because this is the first time, 2014, maybe 2013, depending on the survey, first time in American history ever that less than half of Americans were Protestant, okay? And so again, that's not something you really knew, but you start realizing that we're no longer the dominant voice. There are more voices coming on. It's not just Protestants anymore. In 1955, the major religious scholar at the time, Will Herberg, wrote a book, and he called it Protestant, Catholic, Jew, because those were the only 3 groups. And at that time, Protestant represented more than 2/3 of the people, Catholics 25%, and Jews about 5%, and that was it. So that's the one thing that's going on, is drop in both the number of Catholics and in the number of Protestants. And you can see this another way. If you don't just look at it in terms of religious affiliation, but if you look at it in terms of race. And this is a guy named Robert Jones who wrote a book called The End of White Christian America, which is a pretty major book this year. And what he looked at was the number of Christians who are white and what percentage of America they make up. And again, 2015 was an important year. The year 2015 is the first time in American history that less than half of the America is represented by white Christians. So not just Christians, because there are a lot of Hispanic Catholics, as we said, a lot of black Protestants, but when you take them out of the equation, the number of white Christians in America, 47%, maybe 48%, depending on the poll. But these things are happening, and you can see this in the voting patterns. White Christians outvote anybody else in America. So in 1992, Bush versus Clinton, Bush got 86% of his votes came from white Christians. Clinton, 60% of his votes were white Christians. 73%, 3/4 of all voters, white Christians, okay? By that point in 1992, by the year 2012, that had dropped down to 56% of the people voting were white Christians. The belief is by the year 2024, less than half of the people voting will be white Christians. It'll be other groups of people making the decision, which is bad news, mainly for Republicans, because their base has been largely white Christians, disproportionately. Both draw out of white Christians, but a disproportionate number vote Republican. So, and so the second trend, and we'll talk a little bit more about the declining number of Christians. Again, you're going to see headlines that say, like his, the end of white Christian America. It's still 47% of the population. It's just that the number's declining, and we no longer have a monopoly on what is going on. It's becoming more diverse. And next week we'll talk about that thing, that directly. The second thing that we want to talk about this week is the number of people dropping out of religion. And the term we sometimes use is nuns, because when you're given the form to fill out, you say you're Catholic, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, and then there's the last category, which is none of the above. And so they started calling them nuns. Some people call them unaffiliated, people who choose nothing. And the number of people in that category is exploding and going up year after year after year. Here you can see a trend. At 1970, 5% of Americans said that they had no religious affiliation, okay? Today, it's up to 25%. And so it's growing very rapidly, and you see the numbers are taking off toward the end. More and more people saying that they're not, and well, let's talk about some of the, and this is two surveys combined into one, and the Pew survey has the number 23%, this one has it at 25%. So who exactly are the nuns? The hard thing about the nuns is that, or the unaffiliated, is you're defining them against what they aren't. You're not this. So who are they in a positive sense? It's a diverse group of people, and they're everywhere. They're not just on the coast, though. Raney, which state had the most nuns? Do you remember?
Vermont.
Vermont has the most. I think
I
it was
guess Washington. No, I guess not.
Vermont has. I think it was 37% of the people there considered themselves unaffiliated with any religion. Washington is third. Washington, New Hampshire. Vermont, New Hampshire, Washington, and Oregon. It's on the coast. But even in other places like Mississippi, the place with the highest percentage of people who say they affiliate with the religion, in the last 7 years, the number of nuns has increased by 133%. So the number is small, and it's doubled and more than doubled, but it's growing. And it's growing here. In Wisconsin, one of these surveys puts the number of unaffiliated in Wisconsin at 24%, or another one at 25%, meaning actually the number of people without affiliation in Wisconsin is equal to the number of Catholics here and larger than the number of Lutherans. One other thing about dropping out, I was reading a graph on people dropping out. The number of Lutherans who grow up Lutheran who eventually become nuns now, if you grow up, go through the system and confirmed, about 20% of us eventually become unaffiliated with anything, which is one of the highest. Congregationalists, again, the very highest, they're at 28%, and Episcopalians at 27%.
What occurs to me about those people is to wonder, what do they do when they're dying or when they have to have a funeral?
Here's a very interesting thing. The number of people who believe in the afterlife among those who attend church and consider themselves religious, the number is dropping slightly. Still above 70%, but it's slowly declining. So fewer and fewer of us believe in an afterlife. The only group where that number is going up is among the nuns. So they still, the percentage who believe in an afterlife still is a lower number than for religious people, but more and more of them believe in that there is an afterlife.
So when push comes to shove, they're going to turn to the church.
You don't know that because most of them are, as we're going to see, are pretty young and aren't faced with that situation yet. But yeah, if you want to stick around for like 40 years, you'll get an answer. And then this thing, of those who consider themselves none today, 80% grew up in the church or in a religious community, okay? And I say in a religious community. In America today, 50% of the people who grow up Buddhist end up becoming nuns. So it's not just a Christian thing. It's across religions, it's across regions and everything. And again, some regions, the Midwest here, we're like of the various regions. The Northeast and the West Coast are higher than us, but we're third in terms of the number of nuns, people who are not affiliated with this. So 80% grew up with this. And then, as we said, by nuns, we don't mean atheists and agnostics only. The number of atheists in the country, what percent would you guess? It's doubled actually in the last 7 years.
4 or 5%.
It's doubled from 1.5% to 3%. Number of agnostics, 4%. So 7% total, which means less than a third of the nuns are atheist agnostics. Most of them are, I'll get to you in just a second, most of them are either sort of religious. Some of them actually, 70% say they believe in God, a supreme power, or something like that. Some of them, many of them still pray. Some atheists still pray, which a lot of religious people are like, what are you praying to? And they're like, that's our business, okay? But they're still involved in spiritual practices, which is my next one, which is interesting. When we talk about spiritual practices in the church, we talk about prayer, reading the Bible, attending church, that sort of stuff. When they've done surveys, and they've done exhaustive surveys on these groups of people, what do they consider their main spiritual practices? They list again and again and again 4 things. And again, we're using alliterations today. 1, time and time spent with my immediate family. 2, time carved out for activities with my friends. 3, time carved out and time spent with my animals. 4, cooking food, sitting down for meals.
Sweet.
So it's family, friends, Fido, and food. So there you go. But you know, it's interesting because when we talk about religious practices, we sometimes build these things in, and the sense of community and communal things. Clearly, they're still reaching out for that, but it's being done in a different way than what we've done in the church. And actually, we do it with smaller groups. This is very similar to that, but you're creating a different sort of community. And then the last one, they tend to be younger rather than older. And this next chart, I'm sorry I don't have a better one. I'll have to explain it to you just a little bit, but I'll show you where the difference between the older and younger. I have 2 minutes to get through this because we have a good bit of time with Sophie and Raney. But here are the different generations as they're spelled out. There's the silent generation. There's no one in that, right? I'm kidding. Born in 1928 to 1945. 2007, 9% said that they were unaffiliated, had no religious connection. And by 2014, that had risen to 11%. Okay? And so similar small upticks in each of these groups, the baby boomers, which I'm in, being born in 64, and then Gen X. Again, you're slightly over 20% with Gen X. But when you move to the older millennial and the younger millennial, there's no line over here for younger millennial because they didn't survey them in 2007. Younger millennial, 37% of younger millennials today say we're unaffiliated. So more than a third. And I told you the numbers on evangelicals and mainline Christians and Protestants, the direction is not good. The percentage of young millennials today who say that they are evangelical between the ages of 18 and 29, 10%, compared to 37% for this. The number who say they're mainline Christians, again, about 10 or 11%, compared to 37%. And then the older millennials, those born between 81 and 89, it rose 13 points over this period. It is now up to 34%. So, so if you're talking anybody born since 81 in America, 35% of them say, I have no religious affiliation at all. And you know, again, I'm not saying this is good or bad. It's something the church probably should know about and realize that the trends are not good in terms of membership unless you start reaching out to people like this and making adjustments and trying to figure out how you reach these people. And so why are people dropping out? Do you have any guesses, thoughts?
I'm just wondering if there's any.
What's that?
Science.
That's a good one. And that's one of the most popular ones. I just don't believe it anymore. Or I didn't believe it to begin with. Or I went to college and it conflicted with everything that I was taught. It just doesn't work for me anymore.
Sports.
Sports? That's actually, that'll fit into the last category, I
What
think.
about the economic flight of the middle class over the last 50 years?
Okay, work that out for me a little bit.
The fact that it's stagnated or declining.
I mean, you could argue that both
Is there
ways.
frustration there that somehow fuels this?
Maybe. I mean, that's a tougher argument to make, I think.
It kind of goes with a loss of
Feeling of
trust in
well-being.
institutions.
The second one is a dislike of religious institutions. This is particularly popular with disaffected Catholics who feel like, I had a lot of trust in the church and then bam, all this really horrible stuff is going on. But it's not just them, it's people who don't like the religious, the fact that in the Protestant churches that the religious right and the church has become so well connected. You see a lot of mainliners who are dropping out because they don't want to be associated with the church. Because when you read in the paper that someone's Christian, that usually means conservative Christian, which usually means someone who's extremely politically conservative. And if you don't want to be associated with that, then particularly in the early 2000s, a lot of people started dropping out because they didn't want to be associated with that.
So it's reporters' fault.
Did someone do something about that woman? Didn't you used to teach her? The third one, you're just religiously unsure or undecided. I can't figure it out, and I'd rather be doing Starbucks on Sunday morning. In fact, there are a lot of people here who prefer being in Starbucks. And then the one that you said, inactive believer about sports. This is a lot of people who still actually might believe, but just dropped out. They're sort of the Church Alumni Association. They just are not participating anymore. And then finally, the last one is, well, I'm not sure, I'm just not going anymore. So those are the 5 main reasons. There's a few percent. Wait a second, you were next. Did you have?
No, I spoke to what I thought.
Okay.
Where is the whole concept of polarization? A lot of people are put off by
Unpack that.
the church or politics or whatever because there's so much polarization, and there are those who are saying they have the truth, and there are those who are saying you don't have the truth.
I think that could fit in either the first or the second by the religious institution, or it could be that that I've become disenchanted. The first category include those who say they've become disenchanted with the religion. There's a number of explanations, and actually we can get into some of this. So Raney, Sophie, do you mind coming up here? So instead of talking about millennials and telling you what, as Sophie said, I brought real live actual millennials to our church. So these are my two daughters.
They don't look like ducks, do they?
Maybe not, no.
Sophie is the older one, and she's a senior at Lawrence studying biology and genetics. And then this is Raney. She's at Macalester in Twin Cities studying religious studies and math.
And Arabic.
And Arabic. So I'll ask you a few questions. You guys can jump in, ask questions as well. They don't represent anybody beyond themselves, but I mean, they both go to small liberal arts schools, so it's not representative of anything beyond those liberal arts schools, but they both have a number of friends. Well, first of all, do you guys talk to your friends at all about religion?
I actually, my first 3 years at Lawrence, my roommate was Jewish. She does not religiously identify as Jewish anymore. She's a history major who has taken a lot of religious studies classes. This is like a discussion. We've had plenty of discussions. We had Shabbat every Friday for years. Probably the only situation that I've ever seen, because on Shabbat she wouldn't use her phone or any technology. The only time I think I've ever been in a room with 20 college-age kids who willingly all turned off their cell phones for 4 hours and just had a home-cooked meal and talked. So we would discuss the benefits of her religious life. I've been to bar mitzvahs with her. She's in LA, so I flew out and got to kind of meet her Jewish community. I definitely stood out as a blonde who would had the book upside down. But yeah, so I mean, I clearly didn't fit in there, but they welcomed me and we talked about, I mean, religion is at dinner, anytime we have dinner, it's definitely a topic that's probably gonna come up.
Just so you know about their backgrounds, I mean, religion is a very big part of who we are. All of our relatives, all of our in-laws, evangelical fundamentalists, they grew up here, Lutheran, they were confirmed here, and went to Catholic school at Divine Savior, and now, as you said, you didn't have Jewish friends here. I mean, you knew a few Jews, but you didn't have Jewish friends before your roommate, right?
You brought one guy to speak here.
Marty
I think
Katz.
that was the first person.
And
I
we
met.
went to they didn't go to Israel.
We didn't.
They want to go to Israel, but they haven't been. So, okay, Marty and okay.
I think that, I mean, and he used to write with his like,
Feedback.
yeah, those are the.
He's not Jewish.
Okay.
He's Catholic. So what about you? Do you talk to your friends? Is this a subject that you talk about?
Probably the most religious friend I have, I am attending a school that is very non-religious.
It's been ranked in a number of surveys. The Princeton Review said it was the 8th least religious college in America.
But my most religious friend is additionally a Jew from Israel and practices every week. But otherwise, my roommate is from France, and she has a very, very Catholic family. And she even went to see the Pope in Poland for the World Youth Day. But yeah, we discuss it all the time. I mean, I'm in religious studies classes. Right now I'm in a class called Indian Rome, so whatever I get in class, I always freak out and tell her at night. So yeah, I mean, also because I'm studying religion, I get like from pretty much everyone the ridiculous questions like, is Islam inherently violent? Which apparently you just sign up for when you study religion. But yeah, so I discuss it with a lot of people.
So do most of your friends consider themselves, would they consider themselves nuns, or would they affiliate with a particular religion? Most of your friends?
Pretty much everyone would consider themselves, most of my friends would consider themselves non-religious but spiritual.
So spiritual but not religious. Okay.
Of all of my good friends, there's one girl who I think goes to church every Sunday.
Regularly.
And everybody else I think would go along
Actually, when we were talking about this recently, they both assumed this is the way it's always been.
that if you were at college, you just quit. That's just how everybody quit. You just quit going to church. And you guys, what do you consider yourselves nuns?
I don't want to like scare you, but yes, I do. Don't like that's where I would think I fit in that chart. But still spiritual. I just don't know, especially where I would fit in. I mean, probably because I sat down in like Shabbat and thought like, why don't we have this? This is wonderful, and I don't think I would want to just take from one. I like stuff and other stuff.
What's the stuff you really like Judaism? What is it about Judaism you like? There's an eclecticism. How do you say that? Eclecticism among nuns. A great deal of appreciation of other religions and trying to incorporate many practices, and that's similar to what she's saying right now.
I just had a lot of discussions with my roommate about. She's not a super conservative, like, Jewish person. I mean, that is a big distinction to make. And just the idea she brought to the table of, like good and bad, and like being very open to people of other religions and just the people I met. Like the fact that they like welcomed me in and taught me how to do stuff even though I totally didn't fit in. And I wasn't saying that I'm trying to be Jewish there, but like it was a great experience for me.
This is a book on nuns. It's probably the most research on it. She breaks down nuns into
A lot
13 categories. Agnostic, atheist, humanist, Jesus follower, neo-pagan, nun, secular humanist, spiritual but not religious, spiritual humanist, strong agnostic, and wicked. Wicked. So you both came through St. Matthew's, went through confirmation. You said there were things about your Jewish experience, your friends who are Catholic and so forth that was meaningful to you. What about St. Matthew's worked for you guys? You went through confirmation. What did you find helpful? What didn't you find very helpful?
First off, I'm going to start with unhelpful because I'm an optimist. And I think we don't give young people enough credit. Controversy is very interesting, and if you allow people to question what's going on, I'm inherently against the idea that there's one way, and I think people would be more likely to come through the church if there wasn't this strict idea, and then you realize you experience multiple things in the world, a lot of diversification. You also experience like the rational thought, and then there shouldn't be a conflict. I think it's easier to come to the church from like moral experiences, rational thought experience, and instead of starting with the strict and then trying to fit everything into a category. And I think confirmation definitely turned me off towards considering myself a Lutheran.
I'll start with the good. So I have a couple specific memories. One of which has definitely stuck with me since I was little. When I was little and we were here, my mom was very, very sick. And there's a memory of me, we weren't in church, we were out in like the common space where all the food is after, I mean, I was a kid, so that's all that mattered. But I remember during one of the prayers, like the ones, where you turn in the prayer cards, someone had put one in for my mom, and I was out in the common space, and I heard the pastor talking about her, and it's like as a little kid to like look into a room where there's hundreds of people and think like, there isn't anyone in there who is thinking a bad thing. Everybody's sitting in there like, we might not even know this family, but that sounds horrible, and we're gonna like all wish together in this room that it turns out okay. Like that is a big deal to a 4-year-old.
The sense of community.
Just this all these people that you don't know who are like looking at you thinking like, wow, this kid is 4 and she's dealing with like some really hard stuff, and we can all acknowledge that. I mean, that, for all the bad stuff, I think that is something that like really meant a lot to, and I don't know like how my brother and sister felt during that time. I mean, there were support groups here. We got to hang out with other kids whose parents were sick. Like, I can still name those people. I can still name the parents. That was important to me. So that was a
You
that was a
said
big
there were
one.
2 memories? What was the other memory? Do you remember?
Doesn't really have to do with the church. That has to
Okay.
do with just religion in general. But
Okay,
I have
sure.
like I
What
have
is it?
multiple. I mean, just like going and talking to my mom and having her like say, like, here's this verse where, I don't agree with a lot of the stuff, or like a bunch of the stuff, but there's stuff that just says basically it's the verse about
It's Matthew 25, the story
Yeah.
of the sheep and the goats.
the person who came and gave me clothing, who visited me, like saying being a good person is rewarded. Like that is an idea that just sticks with you. Like, just be good. Like, there are good messages, but there's a bunch of stuff that I don't agree with either. And so, I mean, like, there were like confirmation stuff that, breathing
How
through
would you
that.
change confirmation?
Oh. That was just like, you have to accept that some person is like telling you stuff that's right for you, even though they don't necessarily like know actually what's best for you. It's like a generalized.
So what worked
Follow
for
these
you?
rules.
What worked for you, Raney?
What worked for me?
Yeah. St. Matt's or with growing up in a religious context.
Obviously the community, I think that's true, and I went on 2 mission trips here, and although I have a lot of problems with mission trips, I do think it expanded my horizons completely, going to a new place, seeing different people, and I think that's a phenomenal part of the community, and just like...
We had a great time on mission.
We had so much fun. And 50% of it was my dad being there, but yeah, I think I think I think it's honestly just the community. I got to stay in touch with people, and just being in a place with people that are like you and like agree with you on a certain number of things is kind of enlightening and inspiring.
What do you think it is about religion in general that is turning off so many millennials? So you have, for young millennials, people in your group, you have 37%, and the numbers are going to be higher soon. You're going to have that many people saying, I don't want to be a part of it, I'm not associated. What is it, do you think, that's turning people off to Christianity, religion, or whatever?
I think one of the things, the most important thing I think is that we see religious, pious people, not all of them are good. You see, I'm using piety as like following religious doctrine of what you believe. And just, I mean, obviously a Catholic priest, you can say they went through the system. They followed the doctrine, maybe not to a T, but they were pious people for the most part, and they're like the abusive ones are just completely horrible. So you see this system that is supposed to turn out like really quality, moral people, and then it doesn't always. And also just being at a Catholic all-girls high school, a lot of them talk the talk and don't walk the walk. So just
if
seeing
you had
that.
kids, would you send them to the Catholic school?
If it was the only all-girls school or all one-gender school, yeah. But not for the Catholicness. Yeah. And then also just like the idea of rational thought and how it always conflicts with, so I'm going to turn you off, like really quick math. George Cantor was like a phenomenal mathematician on set theory and was kicked out of the Catholic Church because he dealt with infinities, and that was in conflict with God, because God is the only infinity. And just that idea that like it's this formulated thing, and then we kind of have to figure out like, oh, okay, gays aren't horrible. Oh, okay, like math isn't horrible. All of these things can kind of fit in, but it's after you. It's just like you're editing a version of religion instead of generating it with all of our experiences.
Do you like the religious liturgical service?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I like tradition.
Okay.
I have a question. why religious studies at one of the least religious schools? What,
I guess we can't
like, it's like a two-part question, like, why religious studies?
She didn't start with, I mean.
Interesting
that has a
story.
lot
I
to
was
do with
literally
Poland.
sitting in after I was arguing with my dad over, I believe it was like Martin Luther and
Well, yeah.
him as a person. And we were fighting over it, and he was like, you know, like maybe you want to study religion. And I was like, oh, people do that. And so that kind of turned me on in the first place, because I was like, I get to talk like this with like people and like really cool professors who wear like mini buns on the top of their head and have silver hair and they're like 30. But it was really cool. And so I thought that's why I started to think about studying religion. I think people always ask me this, like, you're not religious, but you're studying religion, or you go to a very non-religious school. I would argue that maybe it's like there's no pushed ideas on me. I'm not going to a Catholic school where I have Catholic professors that are telling me this is what doctrine is, this is what Christianity is. I'm going to a place where, I mean, I have one of my best professors is a Jewish rabbi, and so it's just like you get the different ideas, and then I don't think there's as much bias.
It still means we talk a fair bit. I mean,
Yeah.
she just did a paper where we, on a
Dad, I
topic.
want to talk about that later.
So,
But he can't help me with anything.
I know I'm not good about too much.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
He doesn't help me with math, so.
So, do you think, could you see yourself coming, I mean, the traditional way for Lutherans now is, do you remember that joke that Pastor Gary used to tell about the bat in the church, and they didn't know how to get rid of it, and he said...
Oh, yeah, he told that at my confirmation too, I remember.
Yeah, and then he said,
I
just
was like,
confirm
what?
it, or leave the church immediately. And then it comes back, then you come back when you get married and have kids. Do you see yourselves coming back to the church?
So this is hopefully not a near future kind of thing for me to deal with, but
I'm hoping not to.
I mean, like, this is a kind of a, you know, it's, when you brought up, like, death, that's not something that I, like, thought about, because, like, I mean, also, I don't think really I'm going to be planning my own funeral. I hope that it is beneficial for the people who, like, care about me, so I think it would matter what they, like, so they can deal with their grief, but that's that question, I guess. Coming back, I definitely think it was beneficial as a child to grow up with religion, but I don't think that I would be able to do it with just the ideas from one religion. Like, I can't explain to you how much I like Shabbat. Like that, it's just this thing where you end up sitting and I can like say the prayer. I have no clue what it means, but like I can say it, and like it means so much to my roommate that I like tried to learn. Like, it's funny because I like say all the words wrong and I skip parts, but like, but I understand, I truly understand the benefit of the community that I had growing up. Like, we, as a family, like having people bring you food when your mom is in the hospital is a big deal, because then you're just like eating home-cooked meals and they've got notes on them, and like that's a huge thing, and I don't think I would ever take that away from like a child.
So for many millennials, I'll get just a second. For many millennials, there's a reaction against the idea that there's a set of beliefs, and once you get that, everything's okay. It's to see spirituality as a journey or something that's more fluid and changing. Is that something appealing to you or not appealing to you?
Yes, Raney wants to say something.
One of the things I think that turns off a lot of millennials as well are the creeds. A list of things, the doctrine that is like, you must believe this in order to be part of this church. I know a lot of people have problems with creeds.
Go ahead.
I find this discussion fascinating. I teach millennials. I have a millennial as a daughter, but she hears me talk about growing up Catholic, and I remember the night my son was born, my pastor at the time was lost in the hospital, and I drove him to his car, and he goes, yeah, I never asked you this, but were you forced to become Lutheran when you married your wife because she was Lutheran? And I said, no. I was always having trouble being a Catholic. And he goes, for instance, and I go, no married priests, no women preaching, papal infallibility and no flexibility on birth control. And he goes, but other than that, you haven't thought about it, right? I go, in that order. So I had some issues, right? But the Catholic Church always preached to me, you can't be an A&P Catholic, though. That was a supermarket on the East Coast. You don't get to pick and choose what you want. This was a supermarket where you had to buy everything, or you bought nothing.
But
And-
everybody buys. I mean,
Right,
people talk
right.
about cafeteria Catholics. There's nothing but cafeteria Catholics. I mean, because you look at the Bible, it's not consistent. Church tradition's not consistent. You end up choosing particular things.
Yeah, but the church gets to choose that. You don't. That's changing.
So here's the last analogy. Steve Jobs thought it'd be great to have 1,000 songs in your pocket. I'm growing up with a daughter, she's not just growing up with me, who can have any song she wants and doesn't have to buy an album where they pick one song and 7 others. And I think the analogy goes awry, but there's a little bit to saying there's research to show that a lot of people, when they have families and kids, come back to church. But to me, I told my daughter, it's like letting you pick all the songs you want and saying, when you get married and have kids, though, you'll buy albums again, won't you? I mean, she says no. And maybe by then there'll be a church of the iPod where you get to, I doubt it, right? But I have friends who are Jewish, and they said, why did you want to study? We had to pick one religion in high school to study, and I picked Judaism because I thought the festivals were fantastic. We should have a Day of Atonement. We should have a this. We should have a that. And I wanted to pick and choose, but nobody said you could.
But yeah, well, they like the story that I tell about with many rabbis when you're going through the confirmation process. They have a game called Stump the Rabbi. So instead of you getting all the right answers, you're supposed to come up with a question that the rabbi can't answer, and it's sort of more of a back and forth instead of one direction. You know, one thing that's changing for all of us, but it's more pronounced with young people, is the way we see ourselves. I had a professor in college who said if you woke him up in the middle of the night, he was a little bit embarrassed if you said, who are you? He would say, what are you? He would say, I'm Irish, and then American, and then a former Marine, and then a Christian. And we tended to, for years, to identify ourselves with the institutions around us, that I am part of this community, I'm part of this community, but Charles Taylor, the philosopher, says that we've come in this era called individual expressivism, where we are creating who we are. I mean, just go to Instagram, Facebook, people are creating themselves, and they're using experiences to define and figure out who they are. Why are so many people running marathons, half marathons, 5Ks? It's because they're testing who they are. And the whole discussion about gays is not around, it's a battle between those who still see themselves as defined by institutions and those who say we're supposed to be authentic and truly who we are. And so this is shifting so that fewer and fewer people are identifying. Part of that is the lack of faith in institutions, not just religious institutions, political institutions. How many people want outsiders? The media, everybody hates the mainstream media, for most of us. Most other institutions we've lost faith in. They're not how we define ourselves. And actually, the hardest thing with surveys now is when they start trying to categorize you. So many people today start saying, I don't want you defining me, I define who I am. You don't call me evangelical, don't call me mainline, I'm who I am, I get to say who I am. So, but that fits more with what we were talking about, the cafeteria. And then, just for the record though, vinyl sales are the only thing that's up. So, go ahead.
So I wonder, a lot of people leave the faith or wander away from the faith that they're grown up in because it's really your parents' faith, and you find your relationship with God yourself, and there are points of inflection in our lives where that happens very often, getting married, giving birth, burying a loved one. I wonder, for you two, at this particular juncture in your lives, where you encounter the divine in your daily lives, where you encounter God, what your sense is of God and of the divine.
Before I answer that, I want to say probably we had very different experiences as kids with sermons here. Just so you know, when we probably were like everybody's dream child because we did pay attention to those, because he would be writing notes back and forth with us. Like, so I wouldn't say, I mean, I get
Have
that
you ever come
idea.
across little pads that are like completely filled with arguments about the religion?
Like back and
about
forth
sermon?
with the stuff. I mean, we were very engaged in, I mean, obviously not every single sermon, but like he would be pulling stuff up and saying, well, what do you think about, like he left this other half of a verse out, like do you think that's important? So we weren't, like, well, yes, it wasn't like when we were like 4, we didn't decide like, oh, St. Max, that sounds like the perfect church for me. Like, I was 4, but I would not say that being here was like my parents' religion. Like with us, we were always taught to question and to have questions and like leave the sermon being like, okay, I had an issue with this, I had an issue with this, I really liked this, I didn't get this, could be like go back and like look over that. So it was not listen to this and like this is what we believe. So it wasn't us being forced to like believe what our parents believed or anything. Hold on.
You have to
Okay.
answer the question.
Anyway, where I find myself like feeling spiritual, or where I like find that in my daily life, you know, it's kind of sad, but it definitely is. I mean, he listed those things where it was like family, friends. I'm not gonna say my dogs, because I do love my dogs, but family, I mean, those are the times when I'm, you know, it's honestly rare. We have a brother too. I don't know how people know, but like when all 5 of us are together and eating, and like you get to like take a step back and like you see everybody laughing, and like Mom finally sat down after she like got everybody's food, and like everybody's laughing, like that's when I feel like, you know, the moment of being like, wow, I'm so thankful for this moment right now. It's special. Like those dinners that I keep talking about, when nobody had a phone out. I mean, that's so rare for people of our, like, there was no technology. The lights were off and candles were lit, and we're like breaking bread there.
For millennials, the top 4 are family, friends, Fido food, art, nature, music, and then prayer. Those are the top 8 spiritual
I would
practices.
say 1, I don't necessarily believe in a capital G God. Second off, but where I find a higher experience, concerts are definitely a part where I believe in something greater than myself. If you've ever been to a really good concert, and then obviously family and friends, and just debating with people. I love that as well.
Any other 1 or 2 questions? I think we've run over 5 minutes.
With your background in science, do you see in your concept of all reality that the Bible is a small portion, but yet there is a creator, this whole thing exists, but the Bible is a small portion of it? And what we get from it, and it would be better if we understood, looking for a sense of where we really fit into the picture that's even maybe bigger than the Bible.
So, again, growing up with him, we had probably, you know, we've got, you should see the bookshelves, like in our house. Like, we have a very different view of probably just the Bible in general. He is very, very interested in like the historical, like when stuff was written, who wrote it, stuff like that. So I guess I probably would say, like, spiritually relating that to science. I have an issue when people say that science contradicts religion, because honestly, the more complicated, I mean, I'm in upper level biology classes, and it's just like beautiful. Like, it's just so amazing. I don't think that someone like specifically twisted stuff and like, you know, but like this isn't, there's nothing to contradict it. It's not like, I mean, there is if you believe that the earth was created a certain number of years ago and someone finds something older than that. I mean, but like when you're studying science, it's not innately against spirituality. And I think people make that you know, you can't believe in science and be religious at the same time. That's just not true. I mean, like, it's just, once you start being fascinated that things even can function in certain ways, because it's just so crazy how stuff works. Like, that doesn't contradict the idea that, like, life is beautiful and someone, like, created something.
Does it enhance it, is the question. Does it enhance it?
I mean, it
Does it make you believe in something greater because you're studying science?
I've always seen them go hand in hand. I've never like thought like, wow, this proves it. That would probably like change religion just in general, because if we could prove it, that would, but I mean, they go side by side.
So, well, thanks for talking. And next week, we're going to talk primarily about the diversification of American religion, how it's becoming more diverse, and the advantages of that, how the increasing number of religions and denominations is affecting everybody, and the problems that it causes. And I'll give you an example, and I'll have you guys help solve a couple of these problems. And I've gotten these from what's called the Pluralism Project at Harvard. An example that was in the news just this past week in Williamsburg in New York, it's a primarily Hasidic community, and they have one public pool. And the Hasidics men and women can't swim together. So the public pool has now decided to have women-only swimming times and men-only swimming times. So there's a new group called the Secular Swimmers who oppose that, and they want swimming for everybody at all times. They don't want this segregation. So how do you deal with that? That's the sort of situation that we'll talk about, some of these other situations too, and how you deal with the conflict that's created and the opportunities that are created because of the increasing diversification of American religion. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.